Hello students, today's topic is the spoilage of canned foods. So now we are going to see the different types of spoilage of the canned foods. So let's start with the causes of the spoilage of the canned food. So the cause of the spoilage of the canned food can be due to either the chemical reasons or due to the biological cause, or sometimes due to both the chemical and the biological cause. And the most important kind of this chemical spoilage of the canned food is the hydrogen swell, which results from the pressure of the hydrogen gas which is released by the action of the acid of a food on the iron of the can. And these hydrogen cells are usually favored by first one, the increasing acidities of the food, increasing temperature of the storage, imperfections in the tinning, a poor exhaust condition, and also the presence of some soluble sulfur and phosphorus compounds. So the spoilage of the heated food may have either a chemical cause or biological cause, or sometimes both the chemical and the biological cause. And the most important, coming to the chemical spoilage, the most important kind of the chemical spoilage of the canned food is the hydrogen cell. So the most important or the most common type of the chemical spoilage of the canned food is the hydrogen cell, and it mainly results from the pressure of the hydrogen gas which is released by the action of the acid of a food on the iron of the can. So the most important type of the chemical spoilage of the canned food is a hydrogen swell. Then this swelling will result from the pressure which is released by the action of the acid of a food on the iron of the can. And usually these hydrogen cells are favored, or the production of this hydrogen is favored by hydrogen gas is favored by the increasing acidities of the food, increasing temperature of the storage, imperfections in the tinning, a poor exhaust condition, and also the presence of some soluble sulfur and phosphorus compounds. So as we are seeing about the causes of the spoilage, and the cause of the spoilage of the canned food can be either chemical cause, biological, or the combination of both. And the most important type of the chemical spoilage is the hydrogen swelling, which results from the pressure of the hydrogen gas which is released by the action of the acid of a food on the iron of the can, and it is usually favored by the increasing acidities of the food, increasing temperature of storage, imperfections in the tinning process, poor exhaust condition, and also the presence of the soluble sulfur and the phosphorus compounds. Other defects are the discoloration of the inside of the can, discoloration of the food, production of the off flavors in the food, cloudiness of liquors or syrups, corrosion or perforations of the metal, and also loss in the nutritive value. So other defects that occurs in the canned food due to the chemical cause are the first and foremost one is the hydrogen swelling, and other common types of defects in canned food due to these chemical causes are the first one is the discoloration of the inside of the can, or the discoloration of the food. Discoloration can be either of the can or the food, and also it will lead to the production of some off flavors in the food, cloudiness of liquids or syrups, corrosions or perforations of the metal, and also the loss in the nutritive value. Now we will see about the biological spoilage of the canned food, which is caused by the microorganisms, and it mainly results from the survival of the organisms after heat treatment, or the leakage of the container after the heat process. So the cause of the spoilage of the canned food may be due to chemical causes or due to the biological causes. And coming to the biological spoilage of the canned food, which is caused by the microorganisms, and this microbial spoilage mainly results from either the survival of the organisms after heat treatment. So some microbes are able to withstand the heat treatment process, and which will lead to the further spoilage of the canned food, or sometimes there will be leakage of the container which will act as a source for the entrance of the microorganisms, and thereby leading to the spoilage of the canned food. And the surviving microorganisms are more likely to be of several kinds and may even include vegetative cells. And acid foods such as fruits are processed at the temperature about 100 degrees Celsius, which will result in killing all the vegetative cells and spores, and the only survivors ordinarily are the spores of the bacteria which cannot grow in a very acid food. So usually, the survival of the microorganisms are of several kinds and may even include some vegetative cells, and the acid foods like fruits are usually processed at a temperature of about 100 degrees Celsius, and this treatment which results in killing all vegetative cells and spores. So almost all vegetative cells and spores will be destroyed at this temperature, and usually the only survivors are the spores. So only the spores of the bacteria can survive after this treatment, and which cannot grow in very acid foods. Even though they can survive the high temperature, they cannot grow in very acid food. Then coming to the types of the biological spoilage of the canned food, first we are seeing about the classification on the basis of the cause. Those caused by we can be classified as those spoilage which are caused by the thermophilic bacteria and those which are caused by the mesophilic microorganisms. And the kind next is the on the basis of the kind of changes which is produced in the food, like the putrefaction, acid production, gas formation, and the blackening. And also the next is the types of spoilage also may be grouped on the basis of the kind of foods involved. So coming to the types of biological spoilage of the canned food, the microbial spoilage of the canned food can be classified. First one we can simply classify it on the basis of the cause. That is, sometimes it will be caused by the thermophilic bacteria, sometimes it is caused by the mesophilic microorganisms. And also we can classify it on the basis of the changes which are produced in the food due to this microbial spoilage, like the putrefaction, acid production, gas formation, blackening, etc. And also there are some types of spoilage which are grouped on the basis of the kind of the food involved. So first we will see about the spoilage of the canned food by the thermophilic spore forming bacteria. And the most spoilage of the commercially heat processed canned food results from the under processing is mainly caused by this thermophilic bacteria, because their spores are more heat resistant than those of the most mesophilic bacteria. So as we all know, the most spoilage of the commercially heat processed canned food which are resulting from the under processing is mainly caused by this thermophilic bacteria, since their spores are more heat resistant and can most of them than that of the mesophilic bacteria. And the three main types of the spoilage by this thermophilic spore forming bacteria are the flat source spoilage, TA spoilage, and the sulfate spoilage or the sulfate stinger. So first one is the spoilage by the thermophilic spore forming bacteria, and most of the commercially available canned food spoilage is caused by this thermophilic spore forming bacteria, and their spores are more heat resistant than those most of the mesophilic bacteria, hence they are more pathogenic. And the main types of the spoilage by this thermophilic spore forming bacteria are the flat source spoilage, TA spoilage, and the sulfate spoilage or the sulfate stinger. So first we will see what is this flat source spoilage. And this kind of spoilage derive its name from the fact that the end of the food can remain flat during the soaring, and because the can retains a normal outward appearance, and this type of spoilage cannot be easily detected by the examination of the unopened can and must be detected only with the help of cultural methods. And the spoilage occurs chiefly in the low acid food such as the peas and corn, and the main causative organism is the bacillus species. And the flat source spoilage of the acid foods, example the tomatoes, so the tomato juice is mainly caused by the bacillus coagulans, and the major source of the flat source bacteria is usually the plant ecumena like the branches, but they may also come from the sugar, starch, or the soil. So the first one is the flat source spoilage, and this type of spoilage derive its names from the fact that usually here the end of the food will remain flat during the soaring. So there will not be any change in appearance of the can due to this spoilage. We cannot easily detect that the food is spoiled from the outward appearance of the can will intact remain normal, and because the can remains normal outward appearance, and we cannot easily identify this type of spoilage, and we require cultural methods in order to examine. And the spoilage mainly occurs in the low acid foods such as peas and corn, and the major species involved is the bacillus, and the flat source spoilage of the acid foods like tomatoes or the tomato juice is mainly caused by special facultatively thermophilic species like the bacillus coagulans, and the major source of the flat source bacteria is usually the equipments like blanches, and sometimes it will also come from sugar, starch or the soil. The second type is the TA spoilage, and this type of spoilage is mainly caused by the thermophilic anaerobes. So TA means thermophilic anaerobe spoilage, and they will not produce any hydrogen sulfide, and the Clostridium thermosaccharolytica is the main organism involved. So TA spoilage is the thermophilic anaerobic spoilage, and the major causative organism is the Clostridium thermosaccharolytica, and it mainly produces acids and gases in food. So in this type of spoilage, there will be production of the acids and gas in the food, and the spoiled food will produce a sour or the cheesy smell. So the second type was the TA spoilage, that is a thermophilic anaerobe spoilage, and mainly caused by the Clostridium thermosaccharolyticum. It mainly produces acids and gases in food, and here the spoiled food will produce some sour or cheesy smell. And the third type is a sulfur stinger spoilage, and this type of spoilage mainly occurs in the low acid foods and mainly caused by the desulfatomaculum nigricans, and the spores of these organisms are usually destroyed at optimal heat treatment. This presence of this organism indicates under processing, and it produces hydrogen sulfide which will lead to a typical odor of the food. So the third type is the sulfur stinger spoilage, and it is mainly occur in low acid food, and the major causative organism is the desulfatomaculum nigricans, and the spores of these organisms are usually destroyed at the optimal heat treatment. Usually this type of spores can be easily destroyed at the optimal heat treatment, and thus the presence of these organisms in the canned food indicates that it has undergone under processing, and it produces the hydrogen sulfide which will lead to a typical odor of the food. And the second type is the spoilage. So first we are seeing about the spoilage by the thermophilic bacteria. Now we are seeing about the spoilage by the mesophilic spore formers. And here the bacillus and clostridia are mainly involved in this type of spoilage. First we will see about the spoilage by the mesophilic clostridium species. The sugar fermenting clostridium species like the Clostridium butyricum and the Clostridium pastörianum will cause the butyric acid type of fermentation in acid or medium acid food. So coming to the spoilage of the mesophilic Clostridium species, mainly sugar fermenting Clostridium species like Clostridium butyricum and the Clostridium pastörianum will lead to the butyric acid type of fermentation in mainly acid or medium acid foods, which will lead to the swelling of the container by the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen gas production. And other species like the Clostridium putrefactions and the Clostridium butylinum are proteolytic or putrefactive and decomposing proteins with the production of the malodorous compounds like hydrogen sulfide, mercaptan, ammonia, indole, etc. So, based on the Clostridium species which is present in the canned food, the type of spoilage will also change. If it is the sugar fermenting Clostridium species like Clostridium butyricum, pastörianum, etc., it will include swelling of the container by the carbon dioxide and hydrogen gas production. And in case if the other species like Clostridium putrefaction, Clostridium botulinum are proteolytic or putrefactive and decomposing proteins with the production of the compounds like hydrogen sulfide, mercaptan, ammonia, indole, etc. And the putrefacting anaerobes will also produce some carbon dioxide and hydrogen, which will lead to the swelling. And the spores of some of the putrefactive anaerobes are very heat resistant, and therefore the putrefaction joins flat soil and TA spoilage in constituting the chief type of the biological spoilage of the canned food which results from under processing. Second is a spoilage by the mesophilic bacillus species. And the spores of various species of bacillus usually differ considerably in their heat resistance. But in general, the spores of the mesophils are not as resistant as those of the thermophils. And the spores of many kind of these mesophils are usually killed in short time at 100 degrees Celsius or less. But few kinds can easily survive the heat treatments employed in the steam pressure processing. And many species of the bacillus are aerobic and therefore they cannot grow in well evacuated containers. They cannot survive in the containers. Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus mesentericus can grow in low acid home canned food that has been heat processed at 100 degrees Celsius. So the second one is a spoilage by the mesophilic bacillus species, and here the spores of various bacillus species will differ considerably in their heat resistance, and in general the spores of the mesophils are not as resistant than of the thermophiles, and the spores of many of these mesophils are usually killed at 100 degrees Celsius or less, but few kinds can survive this heat treatments employed in steam pressure processing, and many of the bacillus are aerobic and therefore they cannot grow in the containers, and the bacillus subtilis and the bacillus mesentericus will grow in low acid home canned food that has been processed at 100 degrees Celsius. Next is the spoilage by the non-spore formers, and the presence of the non-spore formers in cans indicates the post-processing contamination. So if some non-spore formers are present in the can, it indicates that the canned food has undergone post-processing contamination, and the organisms whose vegetative cells are heat resistant are more readily or more likely to be found, and if viable non-spore forming bacteria are found in the canned food, either a very mild heat treatment was used or the bacteria entered the container through a leak. So if some viable non-spore forming bacteria are present in the canned food, it indicates that either it has undergone a mild heat treatment or that it has entered the container through a leak. And the vegetative cells of some kinds of the bacteria are fairly heat resistant in that they can withstand the pasteurization, and also some vegetative cells of some kinds of bacteria are heat resistant in that they can withstand the pasteurization process also. Example is the enterococcus, streptococcus, thermophilus, some species of micrococcus, lactobacillus, etc., and some acid forming lactobacillus and the leuconostoc species have been found growing in underprocessed tomato products, pears, and other fruits. So the presence of the non-spore formers in the canned food indicates that either it has gone under treatment or there is leakage. Next, we will see about the spoilage by fungi. First, we will see about the yeast. Yeast and the spores are not thermotolerant, and thus they are not found in suitably heat-treated cans. So, since these yeast and the spores are not thermotolerant, they will not be found in suitably heat-treated cans, and their presence indicates that under processing or post-pasteurization contamination through leakage has occurred, and the fermented yeast are more prominent and they will produce carbon dioxide which lead to the swelling of the cans, and some filaments too can grow on the surface of the food product. So coming to the spoilage by fungi, in the case of yeast and yeast and their spores are not thermotolerant, and thus they are not found in suitably heat-treated cans, and their presence indicates under processing or the post-pasteurization contamination through the leakage, and some fermentation is a more prominent and they will produce carbon dioxide and which lead to the swelling of the cans, and whereas the filaments too can grow on the surface of the food products. Next we will see about the mold. Among the mold, aspergillus and penicillium are most spoiling organisms, and these can grow at a high sugar concentration, and acidification is considered method of preventing growth of the mold, and some of the molds are even resistant to heat, and the molds are common in home canned food where heating as well as the sealing is not under total aseptic condition. So coming to the mold, among the different species of mold, aspergillus and the penicillium are the most spoiling organs or the most common in the canned food spoilage, and this will can grow at a high sugar concentration, and also the acidification is considered a method of preventing the growth of these kinds of mold, and some of the molds are even resistant to heat. And usually the molds are common in home canned food where the heating as well as the sealing is not under total aseptic conditions. So the next is spoilage of the canned meat and food. And the canned meat and fish will usually exhibit two types of spoilage. First one is the by bacillus species, which will result in softening and souring, and the next by the clostridium species, which will produce a putrid swelling. And such spoilage ordinarily can be prevented by the adequate refrigeration. So coming to the spoilage of the canned meat and fish, mainly two types of spoilage occurs. First one by the bacillus species, and the symptoms are resulting in the softening and souring. Second by Clostridium species, which will produce putrid swelling, and it can be prevented by the adequate refrigeration. Okay, next is the unusual types of spoilage of the canned food. Certain types of spoilage will occur only in one or two types of food. Example is the sulfate spoilage of peas and sweet corn. Bacillus species cause bitterness, acidity and curdling in milk, cream and evaporated milk. Canned poultry spoiled by the putrefactive Clostridia.